Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Mayo. I graduated Northwestern in 2012, Weinberg, with a major of economics and a minor of statistics. Currently, I'm the public policy manager at Children's Home and Aid, which is a family and social service agency here in Illinois. We serve about 30,000 families in 60 counties throughout the state. And my role is basically being our representation in Springfield, making sure that everyone knows sort of what we stand for, what issues we're fighting for, and making sure that our folks on the ground have everything they need to be successful in helping children and families throughout the state.
Great, thanks, Eric. And now we'll go to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Chan. I graduated from Weinberg in 2001. I was an English major, 20th century American literature, and spent most of the time that I was at Northwestern also in the pre-med program. I currently work at Cook County Health as Director of Policy, so I'm part of our small but mighty government affairs and policy team, which is a team of two staff who work on policy and government affairs, as well as some admin support. And my role is really at the state level when it comes to policy. So I work closely with our direct government affairs contacts, both in the county board president's office, as well as colleagues elsewhere in the county. And my role is to help analyze policy that affects our health system. So we are a public hospital system that provides both hospital-based care, community-based care. We run a Medicaid health plan. We provide correctional health services at both the Cook County Jail and Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. We run a public health department. So there's a lot of facets of both public health, direct health care, and healthcare reimbursement that our system is actively engaged in. And so most of my role is to monitor and provide direction to the health system as to positions that we should have on different pieces of state legislation. And obviously, as the grounds have shifted underneath our feet, I've been involved in a number of conversations at both the federal and state and local levels as well. And so I'm happy to talk more about how I got to where I am now, and I'll turn it back over to Cassie.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And let's finish introductions with Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Flores. I graduated with a degree in communication studies. I minored in Latino studies and business institutions, and I got my master's. That was in 2014 and 2015. I got my master's from the Kellogg School of Management. I actually started my career in the private sector, so I was an analyst for United Airlines and then was a consultant for KPMG, and most recently I transitioned to education. So now I work for the Office of Student Protections, Title IX, Equal Opportunity Compliance at Chicago Public Schools. So in a nutshell, really working with the 365,000 students we have, 35,000 staff to make sure that we are protecting them. Anything that comes around sexual assault, discrimination, any of those cases, we're the one, our office is handling that. And there are a lot of cases. So it's a small office. We're doing a lot of great work. This is the second year that has been in existence. So my role is just really from a data management side, trying to improve our processes, ensure the accuracy of compliance, and really moving from reactionary to preventative, finding ways to kind of really protect our most vulnerable communities within Chicago Public Schools for students and staff.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And Daniel, we'll start with you with our first question. What were some of the impactful classes or experiences for you in school that led you to consider and also pursue your chosen field?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the classes that the two classes that come to mind, first I took a communication for nonprofit organizations. It was a really great class. It was a real deep dive into kind of how a nonprofit works. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of structure, and there's a lot of ways that there are limitations overall. And it really got me to realize, how much of an uphill battle things were. I think that in tandem with, I was part of a scholarship program called QuestBridge, and I did a lot of work for their national office. And there was a lot of push and pull when you're trying to implement anything. It can be a small little initiative, a new kind of campaign, but there was a lot of levels of bureaucracy that you had to go through and wait to just implement one thing. And the nonprofit class really showed me why there's like so many levels to that, and there's reasoning behind that. and understanding that there is a natural inefficiency of the ways, nonprofits are structured, and you have to be very creative to go around that. I think another class that really helped was the NCBI, the Northwestern Community Building Initiative. So it was a way that you can just take an idea you had and hopefully implement it within the Northwestern community. I had an idea for basically a waiver program, so then for students to do just general one-time events, and especially for students that came from maybe low-income backgrounds. And just, I think that was a real way that understanding that, just because you have an audience with high administrators or different people around the university doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be all for your idea. And I think that in tandem with the nonprofit class, understood that there's a lot of work that goes into changing policies or implementing an idea. So I think that was a real great way of understanding how the world works before getting into my role now. I think just understanding when you're working with, different organizations with, like the executive directors of, Chicago Public Schools, like they have their own agenda. So you really need to make your case and give them the reasoning why this is important and why it needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. And next we'll go to Kathy.
So my experience at Northwestern, I mentioned I graduated in 2001. So at the time, one of the most, I think, illuminating experiences that I had was my participation in ASB, Alternative Spring Breaks, which I think is now Alternative Student Breaks. So my journey at Northwestern involved being pre-med for most of the time that I was there, and pre-med was one of those things that I think is still a very popular area for a lot of students who come in to be focused on. And part of my motivation for being pre-med was I wanted to pursue a career where I felt like I was contributing to something that was larger than me, where I'd be contributing to some aspect of social change. And my experience with ASB really showed me that there's other ways to do that, to contribute to society, that are not necessarily getting into a career in medicine or being in healthcare in that direct manner through a clinical pathway. And so ASB really led me to a lot of different experiences. I ended up participating and getting involved with their executive board and doing a lot of student leadership that way. And that experience really changed the pathway in which I eventually thought about my career path, and kind of thinking, okay, well, med school could be something that is possible, but there are all these other ways to be involved in the nonprofit sector and the social change sector, whether it's kind of domestic issues or global health. So it really opened my eyes to these new opportunities in the nonprofit, government, and social service sector.
Great, thank you. And now we'll move to Eric.
So my experience wasn't a class per se, was a extracurricular activity. So my senior year, I was sitting on my couch watching a Northwestern basketball game, and the mayor of Evanston was having a Twitter town hall, the first one she ever did. And, it was like, ask questions of the mayor about whatever you want. So I decided, at the time, I think this is still a thing in Evanston, the 3 unrelated rule, that you can only have you can't have more than 3 unrelated people in one apartment. There had been a big blow up about it a couple weeks before, so I decided to ask about it on the Twitter town hall, because why not? So, I had a little back and forth with the mayor and sort of, forgot about it, went on watching a game. Next day, the Daily Northwestern comes out, and there's an article about the town hall, and in it, that they had a reporter with the mayor while she was doing this, and she apparently said to the room, while she was talking with me, that I don't appreciate my parents, because that's the reason why you can't have more than 4 unrelated people in the room. I don't appreciate my parents, or something like that. And it kind of set me off, because I thought, well, this is an absolutely crazy rule. Like, why do we have this? Sort of like, I want to change it. And that sort of got me thinking more broadly about my career choices. I wanted to go into something, especially on a local level, where you can actually have a real meaningful impact on people's lives. I'd always been interested in politics, and sort of, and being an informed citizen, but it really made me realize there was more to do. And that sort of set me off sort of on this path that I'm on.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And we'll stick with you again for this next question about your first job and exactly what you were looking for, how that influenced your path. And then if it wasn't your plan A, can you tell us more about how you approached strategizing with your career at that point?
Sure. So my first job straight out of undergrad, I was an intern at a political consulting firm in Washington, D.C. It was not what I had anticipated doing at all. I've been to Washington, D.C. I didn't really have any connections there. It didn't really pay that much. But it was really interesting work. Essentially, what I did was, if you see political commercials where they say, so-and-so voted to raise your taxes 275 times, I would find each of those 275 times and document them. So if a reporter came to ask the campaign, hey, where'd you get that information? They sort of knew they had something to go with, and sort of doing a lot of research, either both with data and sort of with looking at old newspaper articles, that sort of thing. It was a good time to be in DC because it was at the end of 2012. So there was a campaign going on, lots of exciting things happening. I think sort of once the election was over, I realized DC it was sort of slowing down. DC wasn't really the place for me. I don't know if you can tell from my accent, but I'm originally from New York. And at the time, New York was holding municipal elections. So I went home and I sort of started doing networking. I knew a couple of people from just various parts of my life who were in politics. I was like, hey, if I wanted to get into politics, like, where do I look? And it was a city councilman told me, oh, I post all my jobs on Craigslist. I'm like, okay, that's a little strange, but sure. So I found a posting on Craigslist. It was a blind posting. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I wonder who this is. I applied for it, but I kept doing research, and I found another job board, which had sort of more jobs similar to what I wanted to do. And that's how I eventually got on my first campaign as a budget analyst, essentially. So I think it was just sort of, who do I know who's in the space? And hey, can you introduce me to like one other person who might know who's in the space, and just sort of snowballing it from there. That's how I got to the first job that I really wanted and really enjoyed.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Eric. And we'll move to Kathy.
So my first job out of college was with a group called Green Corps. They are a field school for environmental organizing, and they run a 13-month organizing training program. And I knew nothing about organizing at the time. And because it was focused on environmental issues, it was also a newer area for me. But when I was in undergrad, there weren't a whole lot of options, to be totally honest, that were available for somebody who didn't want to go into a more traditional kind of corporate sector job. So the nonprofit options that were available, that were kind of widely recruited for, were things like Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Teach for America, and those weren't super exciting to me. And so I was actually recruited to apply for the Green Corps from an alumni who had graduated the previous year from Northwestern, who was doing the program at that time. And it was one of those things where, because it was really set up as a fellowship program, and because I was eager to learn about organizing and that it was really exciting, I kind of jumped into it head first. I applied and was accepted into the program. And so basically was thrown into the fire with organizing on a variety of environmental and public health campaigns. It was very fast-paced work. It provided a lot of training and on-the-job experience with all aspects of running a campaign, including recruiting volunteers, kind of figuring out who your targets are going to be and the best ways to mobilize volunteers around getting to a goal, a lot of planning, and and got to work on a couple of different campaigns throughout the year, and also participated with a cohort of 34 other Green Corps organizers from around the country. So got to learn from them as well. And what I realized at the end of that fellowship was that organizing wasn't necessarily the job that was for me, but what I ended up taking away from that were a lot of really amazing skills, from organizing press conferences to writing press releases to fundraising to working with volunteers and motivating them. And also I got really interested in policy and politics. I didn't really know what that was before I did the organizing work. And so that led me down a near career path to think about healthcare policy and kind of come back a little bit full circle to thinking about being back in healthcare. And so while organizing wasn't my ideal job, it really opened up these other doors for me that basically have led me to through the path that has gotten me to where I am today. And I've been working in healthcare now since 2003, since 2002, since I ended Green Corps. And, there's obviously a lot of work that still needs to be done in healthcare. And that policy is really, it's kind of the ideal spot for me now. So yeah.
That's great. That's really helpful. I like hearing stories of first jobs that aren't perfect, but they lead towards something you really enjoy. That's great. And we'll move to Daniel.
Yeah, so my first job, I was a pricing and revenue management analyst for United Airlines. So in a nutshell, if you've ever paid too much for a flight, that was me. That was my job. I was putting prices. I mean, I had a lot of great responsibilities. I had 40 routes. I was managing over $1 billion in revenue every year. But what I realized was just like a lot of my work was very operational. So I think the shift in school, things are a lot of project-based. You can tangibly say, I did this or I changed that. Where in my role, it's just like every day, like we need to keep making money. And it's just like, imagine training, but like putting price on flights. So every 3 hours, something would happen, another market, another airline would come in. So that kind of like stress and that kind of just like go workspace, I wasn't entirely used to. But I did learn a lot. I think, like my analytical skills, my technical skills were really improved. But I think it came to a point where it's just like, I'm not learning anything. You know what I mean? Like my whole goal before I got, to where I am now was just like, after networking, talking with people and just saying like, people that start in the private sector and transition into kind of like nonprofit or education, like they do well. And I think I think for me personally, I didn't think I had that much to contribute like straight out of school. So I really wanted to learn and then kind of transition out. And it came to a moment, I'm just like, overcharging people for flights isn't going to help any social causes I care about. It's not going to align. It didn't really align with anything I was doing in undergrad, with like first gen or low income stuff. And it was just like, what do I do? And I think that was a really helpful place to be like, what's my crossroads? Like, what do I have? What do I feel like I still need to learn? What do I still need to do to feel like I really am in a position to really contribute and be that person I wanted to kind of gain the skills for? And through that, I think they were talking to my friends and like other peers. I saw an opportunity in consulting. I think that was just a really good way to grow quickly, have a lot of opportunities, really get myself out there, try different industries, be challenged, put in a very, high stakes environment. And I did that, I went to KPMG. I think I really learned a lot. I really enjoyed the time there. Obviously the work wasn't necessarily completely aligning with, things that I thought I'd be doing. At the same time, what I was learning was really invaluable. And I think at the same time, what kept me sane through all of that is I really spent a lot of work. I did a lot of volunteer work outside, whether that's with smaller organizations with like music, but I also, volunteered within like the same scholarship Westbridge, on their national board, like trying to launch alumni stuff, both in Chicago and nationally, just getting more resources, creating more space, getting just more support for that community. And that really just kind of leveled out, I feel like overcharging people for flights during the day, but just like on my free time, like helping other people that I care about and communities that have really invested in me, really helped me get to where I am now in education and really enjoying everything that I learned before, but now applying it to my day-to-day roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that your experience in those extracurriculars while you were in that first job helped also to lead you to a career where you're at now that aligns with your values. That's great. And Daniel, next question for you. What has surprised you about what you learned or did in school that helps you in your work today? And similar, how does your arts and science background play out in your work today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like a liberal arts education is pretty humbling, and I think that's something you should really understand going into the workplace, especially if you want to do policy, or any space where you have to you be cross-functional teams. Like, you are probably not the expert in everything, and I think liberal arts really taught me that. I think just you're taking classes for me, I had no business in. I remember my philosophy class. I didn't know what they were saying. It could have been another language. I could have used some subtitles or something, but just seeing other people that, were majoring in it or really understood it or generally had a great interest in it, it was able to, like, working with them, learning from them, taking their perspective to better your understanding of it. I think that was just so invaluable, and admitting to saying, like, I don't quite understand that, because I worked for the Chicago Public Education Fund, and, one of our big initiatives was like a principal pipeline to make sure that we get more high quality principals in Chicago public schools. And, like, we would have to go pitch this idea to admin at different universities around the city, and around the Chicagoland area. And they've been doing this for longer than I've been alive. And for us to say, like, hey, you should try this instead, or, give us some information, give us some data. Like, we need to always say, you are the expert. This is what we've been learning. This is what we might say. How can we add value to what you already know in your expertise? And I think just really understanding, being able to learn very quickly about people's work, why is it important, and how that is applied to your role, and also what you can contribute in that. Also, why respecting, like, their expertise through that was, I think, really helpful in the education. I feel like Northwestern challenged you so many ways, but allows you to grow in so many different, like, capacities, which is, I think, something very beneficial. And any role you take after school will really require that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Danielle. And we'll move to Kathy.
So I echo a lot of what Daniel said. I think that collaboration in any industry is key, and being able to communicate your ideas in a way that is able to resonate with a variety of stakeholders is just a basic skill that I think the liberal arts background that I had at Northwestern was really helpful in. And I'll say that when I chose my major, it was not necessarily because I thought, oh, I want to pursue some graduate level postgraduate work in English. It was because that's what I really enjoyed doing. I enjoyed writing and analyzing different writings. I enjoyed the opportunity to have the conversations that I did in both small groups and larger lectures. And that I didn't let that be the only thing that I pursued when I was at Northwestern. So I think that, certainly being having the opportunity to pursue a variety of both interests as well as things that challenged me that were maybe outside of my normal comfort zone have all definitely helped me as I have gone into the career that I'm in today, and helped me, kind of think more broadly and think outside the box as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, for adding to that. And we'll go to Eric.
So I echo, what Kathy and Daniel were saying. I think the idea of this broad base of knowledge. I know one of my job prior to this, I worked for an elected official. So working for an elected official, you have to become an expert on a variety of different issues very quickly, then forget what you learned and learn something completely new the next day. So I think sort of the idea of a liberal arts education, I think that makes the transition to learning those different things easier. And then on top of that, it's knowing like when to ask questions and where to find the information. We're not the experts on everything, but there are people who do know, if we're talking about an education issue, I know, like, these are the 5 people I need to go to. Or if we're talking about, like, a local zoning issue, like, these are the key constituents who I need to talk to make sure they're on my side. So whatever happens is sort of the result that we were looking for. Those sorts of things I think are really important. And then on top of that, Everything you do is about communication. And that's something I think is really valued in liberal arts education. Most of my day-to-day involves writing different materials to convince people that of whatever I want to convince them of. That's really the basis of a liberal arts education, and something that I use basically every day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful, Eric. And we have a few more questions, and I just encourage students at this point, if you have any questions, send those in. We'll be getting to those in a few minutes. But Eric, what advice do you have for networking in your field generally, but also knowing now that we're connecting virtually and so much is remote? How has networking shifted? And can you share any insights for students on how to go about networking with your field?
Sure. So I think, my general go-to was, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee and, can we chat about X, Y, and Z? Can't really do that at the moment. I think the biggest piece of advice I could give is don't be afraid of folks ignoring you. That's really, if that's the worst thing that happens, so be it. For example, when Cassie reached out to me, we didn't know each other. And she just sort of blindly emailed me, and I was really excited by the fact that someone was interested in talking to me. I don't think that's unique to that situation. I think, especially, highlighting any connections you have to the person or why you want to talk to them, that's great. Understand that they're busy, and sometimes it might take them a week or two to get back to you is important too, but just do it. Like the worst thing that can possibly happen is your email gets ignored, which will happen to, 90% of your emails in your life. So just, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. The rejection of silence is the worst thing that can happen. And it's really, in the long term, the upsides are so much greater.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, just to follow up with you on this question, how has your work shifted with the global health crisis, and are those networking principles, would that still work today with your colleagues in approaching them? Are they more busy, less busy? How have things shifted?
Yeah, it depends on the day. So, I think I felt the past 2 weeks or so, I've been getting back into a more busy state because I think people have finally sort of realized we're in this for the long haul, and we got this work that has to be done, and we just can't wait till the indeterminate date when this is over. I think how it's really shifted the way my agency is approaching things. Again, liking to a sporting event, I really want to play offense. I want to be really aggressive, or my thought was to be really aggressive in advancing really unique and exciting policies that would make life better for children and families in the state of Illinois. The state is facing a $6 billion shortfall. Whatever budget comes out after this is all said and done is going to be facing significant cuts, specifically to the human services industry. We've got to play defense. We've got to understand, why these programs are important, why we can't cut them. And that's sort of what's going to be the next, until we have more information. Like, we just have to gather ourselves to make sure we're in for a really big fight. For those of you who don't know, Illinois faced a huge budget crisis a couple of years back due to lack of budget. We're anticipating, we need to take a similar approach. We need to make sure that our legislators know why our work is vital and sort of what the consequences are if our funding is slashed like it was.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Eric. And we'll move to Kathy. Same thing, let's networking in general, and then also how things have shifted with the pandemic.
So I always encourage anyone who is wanting to either break into this industry or change careers to request informational interviews. And those can take the form of grabbing coffee, having an informal conversation in person, and I think for now, until we're told otherwise, a phone call. I would certainly encourage anyone who has the opportunity or has an interest in pursuing organizations or contacts just to reach out. like Eric said, it doesn't hurt to reach out. And I think depending on the sector and the person, some of those folks may have a little bit more time on their hands, to have a conversation. So I think that the other side is use those Northwestern connections. So reach out either through formal alumni connections, through the alumni office, and ask for help in doing that. I've fielded a number of emails and phone calls from folks who are looking to get connected to other healthcare kind of policy folks, public health folks in the Chicago area. And I start off with an informational interview, and I'm happy to connect as appropriate those individuals then to my colleagues who work in either similar organizations or organizations that throughout the course of that conversation come up as places of interest that might be helpful for them to connect with. And, I usually just phrase those emails as, hey, I met this person, they're interested in learning a little bit more about an organization. Sometimes those individuals are looking for career opportunities. Sometimes it's really more just exploring what the possibilities are because they don't quite know what it is their next step is going to be. And so, highly encourage those both kind of cold outreach opportunities, as well as to the extent that you can utilize the Alumni Association and the Alumni Network to go through that as well, because there might be a little bit more receptivity through connecting with alumni.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Thanks for that info. And we'll move to Daniel.
Yeah, so I think, networking is, it's to each their own. Everyone has levels of comfort and things of that nature. But I think, just approach it with a positive attitude. Like, Eric was saying, the worst that can happen is they just kind of, don't respond, and that's fine. I think really my advice, I do like a pre-COVID and then like a now in the situation. I think before, just really try to go to places or engage in things that you care about. I think I've been able to meet coworkers in really cool volunteer events. I really like volunteering. So you already have that connection with people that show up to that. You can feel that you can relate to them. And then, you have a shared experience, and it's so much easier to kind of engage with them. I think now it's a little bit more challenging, obviously, because you don't have that face-to-face. But I think really just, reaching out is the big thing. But I think don't always think of it as super transactional. Like right now you might be in school, you might think you don't have much to offer, but I think you do. And down the line, it's not to say that you won't be in a position where you won't be able to help them. But I think a big thing is just like a great way to bait alumni or people, just like ask about what they're passionate about. On everyone's LinkedIn, there's volunteer organizations or things that they care about. Ask not only about their career, but also what they do and what they're passionate about. And I think another big thing is like now that everything's on virtual email, like go at it with a friend. You can have a group message like you and a peer saying like, hey, there's two of us asking for an informational interview. You think we can talk? And I think, most, as long as you have friends that are down to kind of like listen to things that they might not 100% be interested about, but it might help. I think it's harder to say no to two people instead of one. And now I think like in my work, how things are shifting, it's kind of it's good and bad. I think for us, we have like, hundreds of cases that come in, unfortunately, every day of like issues with students on students, things of that nature. Now that's stopped, like because of, there is no school. But unfortunately, what that's shifted to is now we realize that, like a lot of students are facing abuse in the home, and they might be at home with, like a family member, a guardian that might not necessarily make them feel safe. So now really a lot of our work is able to like work on projects and things that we haven't had time to before, but also shifting our emphasis as well to working with our partners at DCFS, which is like family services, and how we can better support those students, get resources out there, find ways to keep them safe, keep our hotlines open, and really just try to be as preventative as possible. And, especially since, school is not going to be back in session for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing more about networking and COVID related changes to your work. And we've had a number of student questions that have come in. So I'd love to start diving into that. And of course, students, as we continue taking your questions, feel free to chat those in to everyone if you want to come over the audio to ask it, or you can send it in to Laura or myself privately, and we'll make sure to get that question asked. But to get started, I know that Sabrina had a question. Sabrina, do you want to put up your video and turn on your microphone and ask your question to the alumni presenters?
Yeah, for sure. Let me see. Hi guys, I'm Sabrina. I just want to say thank you so much for the information that you've said thus far. It's been super helpful. My question is particularly pertaining to like interviews and summer internships. I was just wondering during your undergrad if you had any valuable experiences and how you found them. I particularly this summer applied to various internships and jobs and just sort of volunteer programs and anything of the sort. But I found it very difficult to sort of find ones that really pertain specifically to my interests, or find ones that were looking for people in the undergraduate stage and not the more like specialized, perhaps graduate students. So I was just wondering how you guys navigated that through your undergrad experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. Daniel, do we want to start with you and work our way, Daniel, Kathy, Eric?
Sure, that works. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a great question. I think, I had plenty of internships, one of them, a friend came up to me and he was like, hey, you should really apply for this. And others I had to really do a lot of work to look for. But I think, it's challenging, like you have a lot of interests and, not always are there positions open to the specific interests. So I think if I would have gone back and looked differently, I would have seen like what skills will those jobs, what skills will that career path need in order for me to like really engage with those interests. So I mean, really look, if you think about your dream position or like an internship that you would really like, what's the thing, and like look at those skill sets, what are the requirements that they're asking for, whether that's, like experience with this or, skill sets or using kind of this software, engaging in that kind of environment, and say like, and look for internships that will provide you that. It doesn't matter if you're kind of in a completely different field. Because if you get those skill sets and you get that experience, you'll be able to translate that over. Because a lot of times when these employers are looking for it, they're looking for that skill set. They're not always 100% looking for the kind of the interest level. They want to see like what you can do, how you can contribute. So that's a really great way to kind of, plan things out. It's a process. You might not get your dream internship, especially this summer when things are even more challenging, but preparing yourself for the next step to like really advance your career in that way.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And Kathy, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, so I guess I'll throw in a plug for a program at Northwestern that I do some work with over the summer, which is Engage Chicago, which is out of the Center for Civic Engagement. So it's a 8-week field study program that places both Northwestern undergrads as well as undergrads from across the country into the heart of Chicago at the University of Illinois' Chicago campus. And I help co-facilitate one of the concentrations that's focused on health and medicine for students who just have a particular interest in potentially pursuing a career in medicine or just healthcare. And there's another one that's law and policy, another one that's focused on organizing. I don't know what the program looks like for this summer, but part of the program, in addition to classroom learning and also the concentrations, is an internship at a nonprofit that is oftentimes focused on the concentration that you pick. So that's a kind of a great automatic opportunity to get plugged in, as well as get some broad experience in learning about the history of Chicago, civic leaders, hear from folks who are doing a lot of amazing work at the neighborhood level and at the very high government and administrative level. And I would say also, going back to the previous question is use your context. Don't be afraid of connecting with alumni who might be able to help you at least get connected with the right individuals. I mean, think of it as a similar networking opportunity in that aspect as well.
Great, thanks. And it looks like as Kathy was talking, Laura found an update on Engage Chicago for the summer. So some great resources. Thanks, Kathy. And we'll move to Eric.
So I go with both Kathy and Daniel said. I think skill building should be the goal, not necessarily where the internship is. None of my internships, or one of the 4 internships I had over the course of my summers was related to policy. but they were all, useful skills. I spent one summer in the Northwestern athletic department doing marketing. I was at ESPN Radio in New York doing sort of marketing and programming, all about building my communication skills. The one thing I would say, especially I think for this year, which might be particularly useful, are campaigns. I think campaigns can connect you to people who, a lot of people migrate sort of between campaigns and policy, and sort of depending on where you are, right? Especially when we talk about local races, right? We have 435 members of Congress up, a third of the senators. It's a really good way to meet people in your area who are interested in policy. And generally you work pretty close. Campaign staffs are small, especially when talking local races. You work with really important people. And they remember that. I know, when I worked on my campaign, I had two really good interns who I am forever in their debt. And anytime this was now 5 or 6 years ago, they always ask me for, recommendations or help or anything. And I give it to them sort of without hesitation because I'm so grateful for all the work they did for me. It's a really great way to sort of ingratiate yourself within a group of people who eventually will be able to be helpful going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Eric, thinking about this year with campaigns. And also, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on the COVID-19 situation as it relates to summer experiences, internships, and looking for jobs. Students are considering fellowships, internships, full-time positions. Where would you recommend they look? And do you have any other advice based on the situation that we're in now that COVID really is impacting a number of industries?
Yeah. I think I have some good resources in terms of like where to find like policy jobs. Daybook is a really good one. Idealist has usually some really good ones. And then just sort of like, it's also a lot about doing correct search terms. So I know I've been in this job for about 6 months. So when I was searching for a job, it took me a couple of weeks just to figure out like what was the right search term on Indeed. So I got jobs that were actually what I wanted to do. So it's sort of a trial and error in terms of that. In terms of advice specifically for COVID, I think it's just sort of, it's working contacts, right? I know I'm currently hiring for a position. So like there are opportunities out there. It's really a matter of sort of using your networks. A lot of times, for sort of smaller organizations, right? They might not necessarily post their jobs. They might go to sort of a close group of, especially we're talking about legislators. They'll go to a close group of people they know and be like, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in this job, or who can we reach out to? So sort of making sure that your network knows you're looking. I know I'm on a bunch of email lists and we get job offers from time to time. And if someone has mentioned to me, hey, I'm looking for a job in X, and I see the posting, like I'll forward it to them right away and be like, hey, this sounds like what you were looking for. So making sure, I think the best thing you can do right now is like making sure your network is aware you're looking. So if they see anything, they know to forward it to you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Eric. Great point. And Kathy, we'll move to you if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, so I'd add to one of those online resources, at least in the Chicago area, and it exists in other major cities as well, but YNPN Chicago, which stands for the Young Nonprofit Professionals Network Chicago. So it's just ynpnchicago.org. It's a resource for folks who are early to mid-career in the nonprofit sector. There's a job posting board. It's likely a lot of the same job postings that you might see on other nonprofit focused boards, but there are also some networking opportunities as well that are meant to be available to a very, very broad range of individuals working in the nonprofit sector or who are looking to switch into the sector. One thing that I kind of want to go back to is that even if you are thinking that your ideal job is going to be in the policy field, certainly keep an open mind. A lot of small organizations may not have a specific position that is exclusively focused on public policy or government affairs or lobbying. That might be folded into somebody else's job, or maybe that nonprofit still has to build that kind of expertise and also comfort level of having policy and advocacy be part of their overall portfolio of work. The job that I had immediately following Green Corps, I was hired as a project coordinator. And so I really learned policy on the job. And that was partly because I was interested in it. And it was an organization that was small enough that when I expressed interest, our executive director said, sure, I'm happy to share with you some of the things that might be helpful to learn, and you can help take some of this off of my plate. So I'd say don't let a limiting factor be if a position or an organization maybe doesn't check all of the boxes for you, but keep an open mind. And oftentimes, if you're at the right place and you can display the right type of motivation and self-motivation, that can be a role that you could create or grow into.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy, that's a great point, and keeping your options open, which seems, ever more important, given the situation. I think that's a great point. And Daniel, we'll move to you if you have any other thoughts too.
Yeah, just to echo what everyone's saying. I think another thing to maybe add is just potentially, if there's an organization you really care about, or they have something, they work with a community or an issue that you're really interested in, like offer to volunteer. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations have had to do layoffs, but it's not like the work is not there still. Usually you're trying to do the same things with a lot less staff. So that's a great way to kind of get experience and say you work with an organization and you kind of have a better understanding. I think also, if you don't find an internship, that's totally okay. You can take this summer to kind of really, just maybe learn a new skill, take advantage of the online classes that are available for free, and also network. Just because thinking about it, again, your career is a process. So just because you don't have the traditional summer internship doesn't mean you can't take advantage of like Chicago Field Studies and have an internship during the winter, spring, or fall. There's so many other times, or even just take a quarter off and do an internship. I've had so many peers that have done that and it's really benefited them. It's a lot less competitive because not everyone is interning at the same time and you have so many options. And I think another great place to really look, I know there's a centralized kind of like document with a lot of the, just general corporations that are either doing layoffs or like having hiring freeze or still hiring. But I think also the MacArthur Foundation has a great part of their website where they link to a lot of job boards and they give a lot of opportunities, not only Chicago based, but also like nationally. So that's also something really good to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys all shared so many great resources. I'll gather these up for a follow-up email to students because these are all really helpful. And this next question is for Kathy, specifically around your English major. And this student is asking, through which channels did you make sure to expand your knowledge and array of interests in order to make a career out of your major?
So that's a great question. So in addition to all of the classes that were necessary for my major, I took all of the required liberal arts classes, so math, science. It helped that pre-med was the track that I was on, so I had exposure to kind of all of those other classes that were outside of your traditional kind of the left brain, right brain type of classes. So I had a variety of those, and I'll say that again, the extracurricular piece really helped round those out. The conversations that I had and relationships that I built on the ASB trips that I went on, as well as working with that executive board and having to plan the trips for students during each break session. Those were really, critical to shaping the full experience that I had, and was also helpful in when I had the opportunity to kind of share my story and pitch myself to not only Green Corps, but also in subsequent interviews, and has really shaped a part of my life. The other aspect is that I was a work study student throughout my 4 years as well. And so I worked at the student center. And so while that, just felt like something I showed up to 10, 15 hours a week, I think that also provided me experience with, another aspect of, I guess you could call it a work-life balance at the time, but doing something that was not exclusively academic and not exclusively extracurricular, but used a different set of skills that helped me build, again, the portfolio of skills that I was able to both have on a resume as well as was able to articulate as a contribution to just what made me who I was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Kathy. And just being mindful of our time, we have just a few more minutes with students. So students, thanks so much for sharing these great questions for our alumni. Maybe we can do one more quick go around of what advice do you wish you could give yourself when you were a college student, and thinking maybe like along the lines of graduating soon. And Kathy, while you're here, maybe we can start with you.
So I will say the one thing that I wished I pursued more, and it's great to hear that there are all these questions about it, but I didn't pursue internships when I was a student, either during the summer or during the academic year. And part of that was, I think it wasn't something that was ever communicated that would be important to me. And I think that because I thought that I was on this path that was so clear that, okay, after I finished undergrad, I would go to medical school, that it just didn't occur to me that could be a valuable experience, not only to give me more skills, but also to help me figure out what I didn't want to do. I think it's great to hear that so many people are, that is front of mind. I would also say the networking piece too was not necessarily something I even understood how important that would be until after I started my career. So any opportunities that you have in networking through internship programs or with alumni or others that might be that just to make those connections. They don't even necessarily need to be part of your career path, but just practicing some of those skills, I think, could be very valuable and helpful as you figure out what the next step for you is.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. And Eric, if you have any other last advice.
Sure. You don't need to know your entire life's path at the age of 22. The story I mentioned earlier about sort of that Twitter town hall, that was February of my senior year. Really, up until that point, I was pretty convinced I was going to be going into sports business. That was what I really wanted to do with my life. And then I just sort of realized it wasn't for me. You don't need to have all the answers. It's one step at a time. And the other, so that's one thing. And the other thing I would say is, the understanding that a job search is a challenging thing to do. We talk about, again, going back to sports, you talk about baseball, the best hitters make outs 2 out of every 3 times they apply. The best job searchers strike out 29 out of 30 times. So it's a process that's incredibly discouraging and can be incredibly frustrating, but sort of you will eventually get there. And I think just that patience was something even still I'm learning to have. And it's something I think at that age would have been, I think it was told to me, but it didn't really sink in. Sort of until I got on the other side of the process and have been starting to hire my own team. It's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing. And just like, you got to have the patience to keep going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And Daniel, we'll finish with you.
Yeah, definitely. I think just really approaching the job process as like a communal effort. I think don't make it a competitive thing. I think I had a few friends, when we're as a senior and we're looking for jobs and things of that nature. But, some people were just like just really internalized it, didn't want to share anything. It's just like, we're not really competing against each other. You know, there's so many jobs out there. We have so many different interests, and like any of these places we end up would be great first experiences. I think in grad school, we were all so supportive and we helped each other out, and we were always, you know, celebrating, but also like working through people that needed help. I think right now, if you're an underclassman, I think if you see, you know, an upperclassman doing something you want to do, ask them like, how'd you do that? How'd you structure your interviews? How was your search process? Like, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like, someone's already done it. So just learn from them so you don't make the same mistakes. I think, yeah, and just understanding that this is going to be a process, but you don't have to go about it alone. There's so much you can learn from other people. And I think the last point, I think, is just also like, you're networking right now, like who you know amongst yourselves, your peers, or when everyone's around you, like they will be your network moving forward. You know, like it's a funny story, like a girl I knew from my floor in Elder, like she eventually, when I was transitioning from private sector education, like a position opened up in the Chicago Public Education Fund, and she was hiring from it. You know, and I think like our relationship, that was a great way to talk to her, really have a candid conversation. There was also an establishment, and then it helped out being the right direction and helped me on the path now. You know, like you really don't know who is going to be where eventually, but I think everyone you have around you is valuable. Like, check in on people from time to time, ask what they're doing, what they're invested in, like what's their plans for the summer. Just ask. You know, I think it's good to keep tabs on people.
Yeah, absolutely, Daniel. Great last points and great insights shared by all of our alumni speakers. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to speak with students today. A lot of great resources that I'll summarize in a follow-up email to students along with your LinkedIn profiles so that they can keep connecting. But thank you, students, for joining us, and thank you, alumni, for sharing your insights. We'll let you all get back to your remote studying and hopefully see you all soon. Thanks again.